Hello Internet, today we're going to be looking at a new shader technique I've been trying to figure out, and that's the stencil buffer. So the way this works is the stencil buffer is something that is rendered with the rest of your scene, and it's an 8-bit integer, I guess, or number that you can set and actually interact with in your shader. Now that doesn't sound super interesting, but the cool thing with this is you can actually reference that in your other shaders. So one of the cool things that I've seen done with this is cutting holes in things. So I actually have an example of that. This looks like a hole in the terrain. It's actually not. But if you look, you can see it looks like a hole. And the way this is done is there's actually just two cylinders. One of them is marking what we should actually render. And so the way this works is there's a stencil buffer that is actually going to go and mark all of these pixels that are part of the cylinder that aren't part of it. And then everything else is going to get drawn. So the way this works is there's two things. We have our stencil, which gets rendered first. There's a significant part here. The render queue is actually used in this case. So you see this is 2001 and the fill is at 2002. That all works because of just the way we have the render queue set up. That's in the shader. I can get to that in a second. All of this stuff is just taken directly from Unity's thing. Unity has an example that does this. So I didn't really want to just show me making this because Unity already has an example. So let's just take that and kind of walk through it and then build something cooler with it. So I'm kind of picturing this as if you want to make like a mini golf game. The cool thing with this is you now have a hole that you can literally, oops, that's not going to work. Like I said, it's using two different shapes. I just pulled one of the objects. And so the way this works is this is going to draw everything that is greater than and everything that is less than and kind of fill those in and say, don't draw here. The other one is just going to draw the back face with no Z depth after everything else has been drawn. Which means after we've already drawn our terrain and our scene, we'll draw this cylinder. But we don't want to draw the whole thing, we only want to draw the specific parts. So that's what the stencil buffer is used for, is sort of selecting those. In this case, we're selecting the intersection, which means the intersection of our terrain has this fun little circle. But the cool thing is, now we have a hole, we can just kind of move on our terrain, and it just slides. It won't look like a hole underneath, because we haven't really set it up to do that. And so the stencil buffer is actually disabling pretty much everything here. So that's part of it. And it's not actually 3D. If I try to go into it, it just disappears. It's just drawn on top of your terrain. The depth buffers from the terrain is still happening, so if you want to actually drop something into this hole, you're going to need to do some other tricks that I'm not entirely sure how. So yeah, I'll leave that. But this is sort of what we're going to be doing. There's two shaders that we have. The hole prepare and then the hole itself. So hole prepare is actually what's doing the stencil buffer. This bit right here is actually all the magic. And so the ref is the actual value we write into the stencil buffer. In this case, we're just using 1. It's an 8-bit integer, so you get 0 to 255 that you can write in there. Comparing is actually how you compare whether you should write to it or not. In this case, we are always going to write to it, and we're going to replace whatever value is in the stencil buffer. So that is that configuration. Our Z-write is off for both of these. That's actually wrong. Our Z-write is off for this, which means we don't draw to the depth buffer. So the way the depth buffer works is if you try to draw a fragment that's already drawn on top of, so like, say you have a bunch of brick walls, for example. If the first brick wall in front of you is drawn, all the ones behind it don't need to be drawn because you're not going to see them. So the GPU is actually going to optimize that and say, you don't need to draw these. The depth buffer won't see it anyway. So if we wrote to this, we could get some weird glitches because we'd have written an invisible shape onto our geometry, which probably isn't what we want. So that's pretty much it. This is just doing some basic stuff. It's rendering out a color, but you won't actually see that. And then there are 2 passes to this. So the pass is what actually renders the thing. It's actually what's taking effect. And so it just calls the vertex and fragment shader that we created. This is all pretty basic vertex fragment shader stuff. It just does the bare minimum. We don't need like tessellation or anything. It just takes the stuff, translates it into space, and then draws a basic color on it. Nothing fancy there. The interesting thing is there's 2 z-tests. One will do everything greater than it, and one will do everything less than it. And one is drawing the back, and one is drawing the front. Those are configured in a way so that we'll actually grab the correct bits, which actually gets us only the whole not being colored. So that's sort of what we're trying to do. To think of it another way, if I can select this, we have this cylinder here. Part of it is going to draw this bottom bit that is underneath the terrain, and part of it is going to draw that upper bit. So that's what the 2 passes are doing. If you draw a line across the screen, 1 pass is doing the top bit, and 1 is doing the bottom bit. That's it. Then the bit in the middle works just great for us. So this is actually the back face. So it's actually the inside of this just extended up. And then the bottom down here is going to be the front face. And that's just the other side. So I think that's pretty much everything we need to cover there. And then the whole is fairly simple. It's just saying if it's not equal to 1, which is the value we wrote for that stencil, then we're going to draw it. So if this is false, then the pixel is discarded. The fragment is discarded and isn't drawn. So this is actually saying if we're not equal to 1, same thing we got here, then do all of this stuff. And this is just a basic surface shader. So if you've created anything else, you can take a surface shader and just plug this part in with the z-test off, and you should be good. Another thing, they turn the cull off, or they flip the culling, so it's drawing the back face again and not the front face, because again, you put a hole in the thing, you want to draw the back, not the front. So we have this fun shader, or not this fun shader, we have this. So one of you suggested that we should use the random seeds with this particle system instead of actually just manually simulating it. And that actually works. So by having the seeds of both of these particle systems, they're duplicates of one another and with the same seed, which means they'll simulate exactly one on top of the other. So if I set one of these to be our preparation and actually stencil everything, and then the other one to actually draw the holes, my goal is I'm going to turn this from a wall into a fissure. So you're going to cut a canyon in the ground. At least that's the hope. I'm pretty sure this is going to work and it's going to look awesome. But if it doesn't, then I've never tried this, so who knows? So that's what we need to do. We need to take those 2 shaders I just walked through and apply it to this. So I'm going to be modifying everything I already have. We have our cracked earth shader and our surface slicer. I think that's what I was calling it. So the surface slicer is just going to mark things and say you can cut through this. So that's not right. Actually, hold on. I don't need to do anything else for the whole preparation. Nothing needs to change there. We just need the hole modified, right? Because I'm still using the same stencil. I'm still doing everything. I just need to reference this instead. One other thing I forgot. You'll notice there's this Q here that's saying geometry +2. And this other one, geometry +1. Geometry is when in the render queue to render most of your standard geometry. By adding onto this, you're putting this further back. So this one is +1 because it needs to happen after the geometry has been rendered, so you know what to render through. But you need it to happen before the second one. So that's sort of an ordering that has to be imposed. So we're going to need to copy this and put it on this cracked earth shader that we have. So this is the triplanar shader that I was using in the previous video where we kind of built this particle system from scratch. I think we can discard most of that and just start working with all of this. Shadows probably aren't going to work. I'll leave them on, but I suspect we're going to get some weird errors because I don't think self-shadowing and stuff is going to work with this. Because again, we're not really cutting a hole in this. The geometry is still there and will still hit light. So I can kind of show that. It looks a little bit interesting. So we've got all of these particle things. Where's my hole? So if we take the hole and just scale it up a bit. That's interesting. I was expecting that to draw through the particles. Why didn't it? Interesting. I don't know. So previously when I was exploring with this, it should have just drawn over the particles, and so you just get like this black or red or whatever color you had set it to thing, and it would just recolor all of these. That isn't really what you want, but that's sort of how this effect is working, is it's just rendering something on top of it, but making it doing sort of an illusion that it's behind it. And that's just from the shading. That is not how you pronounce that. What am I doing? All right. So before I go any crazier, let's just revert this because I don't know why that didn't do what I wanted. And then cuttable cracked earth. There we go. So let's grab all of this stuff and plug it in here. There we go. And so most of this should just work. We've got everything else. Our stencil is still there. And I don't think there's much else for us to do, really, because all of this is just normal surface shader stuff. The fancy stuff is all coming from the Stencil Buffer, and we've already got that. So, assuming that just works, I didn't need to go there, but assuming that just works, I have two different particle systems. I need to assign one of them the cracking terrain, and one of them the other one. Oh, I know why that wasn't working. The cylinder wasn't working because I had already changed the Q on this. So this looks weird because render order is going to matter here, which I'm not entirely sure how rendering this many objects in this way is going to turn out. I've never done it before. So I'm learning myself, so I kind of want to figure it out this way. It does look really weird right now because, again, rendering order, it's going to be all over the place. Particles give us a way to actually change that, so we can probably get away with modifying that and adding some order. That may help if we run into other issues. So we have the stencil. I need to assign our hole prepare here. So our material, instead of cracked rock, we'll do the hole prepare. And then for our particle fissure, we just need the cracked rock, which should already have the shader applied to it. Yeah. Are we getting an error? Why is this pink? I'm pretty sure. Hole prepare. That's why it's pink. No, it's not. Red, green, blue. That's not red, green, blue. Actually, no, never mind. That's backwards. Alpha comes first, I'm pretty sure. So that makes sense, I think. So, if we do that, we should get a red thing now. Maybe. Or not. Okay. So we're going to have to do a little bit of investigating because that's not doing what I want. Our hole prepare, as we kind of showed here, is just empty. It won't draw anything. You shouldn't see it. It should just be empty. But it definitely isn't. The cool thing, kind of culls through all that. I must have missed something. It's just not doing what I had hoped. Geometry queue, that seems good. Is it because I have screwed up the queue of this? No, it's not. So I was checking the render queue here from 2000, it should be 2002, and it is. So that's not wrong. All right, let's try this a different way. This particle system, we're going to put on hold for now, just because I don't know if that's the issue or not. And then we can put this back together, throw it into the ground, cool. And now we have that fissure projectile that we created last time that will create a similar effect. Let's see if we can get that to work and then go back to what we had previously. So there is our fissure. It's casting shadows, which looks really weird because it's like, so when we have like the things projecting, since the shadows are projected, it's actually going from the top and projecting the back face there. We probably don't want that. I'm curious what will happen when I actually apply the stencil here. So if I throw another cube on here with our hole prepare instead. There we go. That's not how I wanted to do that. Cool. Yes. Okay. So that's working. We're getting, it's self-shadowing, so we actually have a floating shadow. Probably don't want that, so let's turn shadows off. It's actually following the terrain, which looks really weird. I don't know. Maybe somebody can figure out something that makes that useful, but I can't think of anything. So we're just gonna remove this full forward shadows and get rid of that. Because we definitely don't need that, and then I can just turn off shadows on both of these. So cast shadows off, and I don't think it needs to receive shadows either. But there we go. Now we've got this hole of cracked earth. So if I apply this now, that should now be applied to our projectile. So if I shoot the projectile, it should cut through the ground. It might be a bit high. Let's lower that a bit. So, or raise it a bit. I'm not sure. So I moved to an actual Unity terrain to just kind of show that this works on pretty much anything. It might not work on anything. That's a interesting effect, but it's not really what I wanted. It's unique. Not necessarily in a good way. But so I don't know why that's happening. Maybe because our stencil is overdrawing itself and doing it in the wrong order. So because everything just overwrites itself, we may be destroying some of this history, and then just everything's kind of writing one on top of the other, and it's just not working. Let's see if we can change that. So if I pull out cull front, oh, hole prepare, there we go. Z-write off. If I prevent that from writing to the Z buffer, so no depth buffer effectively, what happens? Does it look the same? I would imagine it would look different, but it doesn't. Huh. It's very clear that it is cutting it. I think we're just, I didn't really consider what would happen with multiple of these, and that's the issue we're running into. I may need to take some time and kind of think this through. So I will cut here and be right back once I figure that out. So Till then. Okay, I think I know what's going on, and I think I know how to fix it. I'm not sure I like the idea I have for fixing it, but we're going to try it anyway. So the idea here, the reason I don't think this is working is if you look at the way our stencil buffer was working, the way I had talked about it is we were setting the stencil for everything below and everything above. The problem is we just tried to do that for like 1,000 objects. And so even if this circle would not be covered normally, what's ending up happening is something else is covering it up. So some other object is overlapping it. So if I move this over here, I should be able to duplicate that by just copying it and then sliding it forward. And you can see how it kind of intersects in that weird pattern, because now it's only doing the parts that aren't shared between the two. So instead of doing this as a not equal to, we need to figure out a way to get this to be equal to. And I don't like the idea I have. If anybody knows a better way, let me know, because this is just me not really knowing these stencil buffers coming up with a solution. It should work, but I'm not super super excited for it. So the idea here is we are going to copy this whole prepare script again. And instead of doing what we were doing previously, I'm going to whole prepare 2. The idea here is whole prepare 1 sets everything like above or something. How will this work? That won't work either. Okay, never mind. My idea didn't work. So the original intent was to set everything like above and everything below, use 2 different things, and then sum them. That isn't going to work. Again, everything is going to get rendered in a batch, so it's not going to overlap. So I actually don't know how to solve this problem for a large number of objects. What I might be able to do, though, that might improve the effect or make it worse, I'm not entirely sure. What's going on? There we go. Is what if we have this whole prepare. It's doing everything where it's greater than and less than. I think we can disable one of these. That's not going to work. There we go. And we might get a better effect. That's causing it to stick above ground, because it's not equal to. Okay. So if I set the whole now, this to be, instead of z-test always, let's do less than. So this will only draw things that are below ground, theoretically. That isn't the cracked earth shader. That's not going to help. Let's grab the whole this time and do a z-test less than. Now, theoretically, that's going to throw an error. It doesn't know what less than is. I may be screwing that up. Less than? What were the options? Less. Okay. I was close, okay? There we go. So if this is less now, theoretically, wrong direction. Let's go greater. There we go. So we're back to our hole in the ground. This will work less well for other things, but for this, it should work. For cutting a hole in something, it should work. And so hopefully, by doing it that way, we're not shading the above ground anymore. So the stencil buffer actually isn't going to cover this part. We're only drawing the intersection though for the below bits. So this should work since we have a primitive object that isn't super complicated or anything. It won't necessarily work if we have something a little bit more complex, I don't think. But since we're using cubes and cylinders, I think we should be able to get away with this and it should just work. So only one way to figure that out. Let's change this to be a grader. So this should mirror our hole now. There we go. And so if we run this and shoot the projectile, the effect is better, but it's still an issue because now we're just drawing everything like this. And it's definitely obvious we're using cubes because this is happening. I don't actually know how to solve this, so I think I'll leave it here and do more research because I'm kind of lost. So we're close-ish, I think, but I don't really know how to finish this effect. So there will be a part 2 sometime, and we'll finish this up. But for now, I'll leave it here, and you guys can experiment with this on your own. So if you guys have suggestions on how we could use this effect or actually fix it, let me know in the comments, and I'll definitely look at them. But that's it for this video, so until next time, see you, Internet.